Is this on? Yeah. Hi, everyone. So we're just going to start. I guess some people may be drifting in from dinner or something like that. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for supporting the Writers Guild Foundation. We do these evenings partly to raise money, also to, talk about writing. But the money part goes to screenwriting programs that we have in high schools all over LA, and we also do a vets program. A vets writing program where we mentor vets.
War veterans, not people who take care of animals.
Yeah, exactly. That thing where, the veterinarians program is coming along nicely. Anyway, it's really good to see you. I just want to bring on our guest. He's an incredible filmmaker. His first feature film thrilled audiences and won him an Academy Award amongst many other accolades. And really, more importantly than any award, I think just really had something to say and said it in an amazing, eloquent, and unforgettable way. So please welcome Florian Henckel von Donnersmarck.
Welcome. We also want you guys to know we will be going to you for questions. So this is an unbelievably rare and special opportunity, and I hope you guys will take advantage of it. Here's some water.
Okay, you already gave me wine, so who needs the water? No.
I think that. Did you bring your wine in? I thought that was my wine.
And did I make sure?
Did Florian? Let's get some wine for Florian, man.
Yeah, where is his wine? Oh, it's. You know what? Do you want me to run out and get it?
No, somebody will get it. No.
Yeah.
What did you say? A watered down version?
Yeah, I said we want the truth.
Okay.
Something tells me based on the movie.
He doesn't seem
he
that
might
shy.
Tell you the truth. It's just a wild guess.
No, it's true. I was debating on the way here with my wife. I was saying, am I really going to tell the truth? But then I thought, if you lie to fellow writers, you're really a terrible person. So,
That's true.
So I'm going to try and tell the truth.
And interestingly, of course, your movie is all about the writer's responsibility to tell the truth. So I think you're going to have to. Uh-oh.
I just wanted to, Winnie and I watched the movie, and I saw it when it came out. We watched it again this afternoon, and it was really interesting watching it again, knowing where it was going to go, because, again, as a writer, you see so many more things that you planted in terms of where it's going, like Krista's affair. You see, like, when he puts his hand on her butt at the after party of the theater, it just seems like he's being fresh. But then it's sort of tipping us off to the affair in which he's taking the pills. But that's, of course, not what my point was. My point was, yes, for those of you who have heard me talk before.
Say that the first thing that pops into Robin's mind is how he puts his hand on her butt, right?
But again, I'm just saying, as a writer, you see, yes.
But actually, when we were watching it together, the point you made was, it was interesting how little you. In other words, you didn't show the scene, you didn't write the scene where he first approaches her, where he first co-opts her. You wrote it in the middle. You just picked it up.
Kind of like how this conversation is going already.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing I not only admire, but it makes me think, was there another way that it used to be, or was that something you found somehow?
I always find that it's fun to enter a film really immediately. That's why also I never like to do a big credit sequence of any kind at the beginning. I like the film just to start, because it should thrust you into the reality of a film. And I do think that slight confusion that you sometimes feel at the beginning of films is actually a healthy thing, because it gets you involved. It kind of makes you pay attention a little more than if everything is explained. And remember, it was a big debate with the various organizations and people producing and distributing and so on the film. As I was developing the script, they always said there are all these words that no one's going to understand about technical Stasi terms and so on. You have to explain them. And I said, I think it's kind of fun to not understand everything. It throws you into reality. You don't always understand everything when you're
alive.
Yeah, when you're alive, it's true. And so So I tried to reflect that.
I love that, actually, and it's true. There is a certain. I mean, I think one of the things we do as writers is we have to figure out where's the line between I'm confused and I'm leaning forward and I'm interested to know more, and where does that cross over into I'm overwhelmed because I'm so confused I can't. Not. I mean, what your movie does masterfully is it gives you these little things where you immediately start to understand. I mean, I thought even with the interrogation scene in the beginning, and then seeing him teach a class, that blew my mind, because that was like, I don't know, I'm very ignorant. I don't know a lot of that, of that world of East Germany, or what that culture is like, or what it was like to live there. That blew me away right away. Like, oh, he's an interrogator, but he's also teaching people how to do this hateful thing.
Yeah, the thing is, I didn't really know that much about that whole thing going into this project. I just had that idea, and I grew up in the West, and my life was nothing like what the people in the East experienced. Of course, I lived in a free democracy, but I think it's for example, the inspiration for that scene, that interrogation scene at the beginning, came not from actual Stasi materials. I looked through all that and found nothing about the kind of lecture that I was envisaging. And so I actually found it in a book about those methods of interrogation. Came from a book, actually an American book that was written for detectives, for private detectives who work for shopping centers. And they said, if you want to find out if someone's guilty or not, just keep them in the room and interrogate them for a long time. He probably meant hours. And if they get angry and angrier, they're really innocent. And if they go kind of quiet, they're probably guilty. I thought, wow, that's a really good system, and there was nothing about that, but in any of the Stasi or historical documents about East Germany. But when I then wrote it, and after we screened the film in East Germany, so many people came to me and said that's exactly the kind of interrogation that we were subjected to.
Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is, I always think that it doesn't matter from where you take the truth. You'll feel if it's true or not. It doesn't. Right. There's this. I remember that I once read something that was it the CIA, that they used people for something called remote viewing, which is this thing where they sit you in a room, just a creative person. You work for the CIA. They say, now we don't know what Osama bin Laden's hideout looks like. You tell me what it looks like. That person doesn't know anything. He has nothing to go by. And they'll just picture where that is and suddenly describe it in absurd detail. And very often these things turn out to be right. Because if you somehow manage to get, of course only certain people can do that, but I always feel that's what we writers have to be. We have to be remote viewers. We should be able to do that job for the CIA.
I'm seeing a rug. I'm seeing some weapons.
Well, hopefully it can be a little more useful and specific than that. But yes, that's where we can start. It's a good starting point.
But you think that is so important, what you just said, I think, about writing, because I think all of us have had the experience of stopping ourselves and going, well, wait a minute, I don't really know, and feeling inadequate. It fascinates me that you would say that, because I think that's an important leap, that we train ourselves to go, no, I can know this, even though I haven't experienced it.
Yes. No, I agree. I mean, I had that insight through another writer, through Anthony Minghella, who I always listen to all the DVD commentaries from directors, writers that I admire. And he said this interesting thing about The Talented Mr. Ripley, which to me is a really incredibly important film, a film that I've probably watched more often than almost any other film. And he said that on his first 2 or 3 films, he'd done a film called Truly, Madly, Deeply, which was a kind of a ghost story, romantic ghost story. Then he'd done another film, The English Patient, of course. He'd done a film called Mr. Wonderful. That was his first film in the U.S. with Matt Dillon. he said people always said write about what you know. So he wrote about working class people and so on. Then he said that this film was about something that he didn't know anything about at all. And he could write it better than anything else because somehow it did reflect his personal experience. You know, his feeling of he had thought so much about these kind of people that he wanted to be part of. He'd had that yearning. It's not. You know, your own personal experience is not to be taken literally. It's supposed to be taken emotionally, and you know what you experienced. You know, and I think that. I know what it feels like to be, subjected to the Stasi, and that comes, somewhere from my personal experience, and it's not because I actually experienced that. You know, these we have to find translations for our emotions, and they can be very different on the surface.
But the emotions are very real, and I feel like one of the things that you really got to in that movie was you really made me feel viscerally what it would be like to be in a police state.
Oh, yeah.
And to have everything, everything watched and judged, and especially in our country right now, art is so dismissed as something that's like an extracurricular elective, and that's not important. But I was asking myself too, how far would I go if they were going to take my art away from me? You could never write again. You could never be visible again. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting that the people the Stasi was most afraid of were artists. In a way, especially writers. They were terrified of us, and I think that they were right in that. You know, they somehow knew that cliche that the pen is mightier than the sword really is true. It's ideas at the end of the day that change people. And I'm sure that if you really went into the biography of Gorbachev and looked into what is it that changed him, I'm sure. I mean, he probably wouldn't admit it or anything, but I'm sure that it is writing somewhere that changed him and made him see things differently. And I think it's like that. If you really go into the biography of people, I mean, I know it from my own life. I'm sure you know it from yours. It is those transcendental experiences of art that change us and that somehow make us understand something. And it's what we aspire to create. And I think it's something very fundamental.
I read that your almost like the core idea that you had was the idea of listening to that piece of music, and that transformed the listener. Mm-hmm. And was that the really the core of the movie? Will you talk about that?
Yes, it was.
And how did you build a whole movie from that one image?
Mm-hmm. I started film school in '97. In Munich, there's one government-owned film school, which is really a paradisiacal institution because once you're accepted there, you're on a full scholarship. They even pay for your film stock and everything. It's pretty fantastic, and it's paid for by the government. I mean that shows you in a way how terrific it is if I think a government, a state really professes how much it cares about art, and I think it's produced many very different kind of filmmakers. In the first year that it was started, they had Wim Wenders who studied there. I mean most German filmmakers that you will have heard of, have come from that school that only has 12 students per year. It's a very small class, and it was our professor there. It's interesting. He wasn't really a filmmaker, and so I really don't subscribe to this idea that those who can do and those who can't teach. He really could. He could teach wonderfully. He could make us understand things. He had some bizarre theories, or they seemed very bizarre to me at the time. But one of them was that he said that creativity of any kind is a muscle that you really have to build, and that it's a muscle that doesn't work like the body muscles that you gradually increase the weight. He said you have to completely overload it to get it to grow, and so he had this thing that during the first months during the first, was it kind of, I think 6 weeks of our studies there, when of course everybody was feeling under huge pressure, to live up to the standards of this institution. He said, in addition to all your technical training that you're receiving this time, I want you to write 14 treatments, and not really treatments, kind of, they call it exposé, and as the French word we use in Germany, which is like a 2-page treatment, an outline. Outline is what it's called. An outline of completely new stories, films. So you will produce in these 6 weeks 14 films. And if I ever hear that you're giving me something that you've already developed at some earlier point, I'll throw you out of the film school. This was really a pretty extreme thing. Of course, only later did I realize he never actually read anything and threw the stuff away straight into the wastebasket. It was really, but I can assure you, I never felt under as much pressure in my life. And really, in those first 6 weeks, there questioned very seriously if I'd chosen the right path. And I thought that's, because to really have to be creative, at the push of a button, it's much worse than being, a toast waiting to pop out of the toaster. It's just terrible. And I was living at my aunt's place. I hadn't yet found a place in Munich, and I don't know. I'd exhausted every single idea that I'd had, and I had.
How old were you at the time?
I was 97. I was 24.
Yeah, you don't have that many ideas when you're 24.
No, and I felt, okay, this is it. I give up. And then I remember very clearly. It was the evening. I was really depressed to stay at dinner for long with my aunt. Then I went upstairs into the room and just lay on the floor, really, truly, incredibly depressed, and was just listening to some. Actually, it was the Moonlight Sonata, Mondschein Sonata, from Beethoven. Moonlight Sonata from Beethoven, and just thought, oh God, this just all sounds so easy and beautiful, and then just forgot about having to create something. And suddenly remembered that I'd once read in a Lenin biography, which for some bizarre reason I'd read as a child.
Well, you also speak 6 languages, so.
Yeah, but
he speaks 6 languages. There's a lot going on here.
So but there wasn't a healthy reason. So I'd read this thing that Lenin was very close friends with Maxim Gorky, a really wonderful writer, and actually someone very useful, I find, also as to us filmmakers. He's really I know he's not read that much in America. I'm sure that has historical reasons, since he stands for a different kind of ideology. But his writing is very interesting, and he wrote a book about his, wrote many pieces about his encounters with Lenin, and once wrote that Lenin had said to him that Beethoven's Appassionata is his favorite piece of music, and that, however, Lenin had said to him that he doesn't want to listen to it anymore, because if he listened to it, it kind of made him soft, and he couldn't crush all the skulls that he needed to crush on the way to completing his revolution. Wow. And that had really, that story had always really fascinated me, and it always, I don't know, I find there's a real philosophical question behind that. It's, is the emotional effect that art has on us, is it always a good thing? Is it something we should always let happen to us, or not? Or should we shut it out to achieve certain things? I know that Plato also felt that theater was not necessarily something good for the human soul, because it could just it could make you identify with the hero in the situation, just take you on a ride that wasn't the ride you were supposed to be on.
Well, like the talented Mr. Ripley.
How so?
Well, that you're identifying with the sociopath. Kind of.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It could. I mean, I think that somehow very subtly, the talented Mr. Ripley actually makes you. It's almost. I think it's almost something which paints a very moral picture by contrast. That it really makes you feel how incredibly lost Ripley is. I mean, at the end, when he kills his his lover, the one man who really loves and cares and for him and understands him. You know, it's such an incredibly sad scene. I don't know if any of you have not seen that film and studied it very seriously, please, leave now and watch it, because it's.
They can wait a couple hours.
We'll still be there.
No, it's just one of those.
So that thought that came into your head as you were listening to Beethoven's sonata,
Mm-hmm.
that thought, that memory of that piece in that book, and that anecdote.
Yes,
Can
it's something I thought then. How would it be if I could create? This was the thought, me lying on the floor and thinking, what would it be if somehow Lennon had been forced to listen to the Appassionata? But of course, that's not a good setup, because to take someone, if they have to listen to something by force, they will not be they will not be prepared in the right way to take it in properly. And so I thought, okay, he'd have to somehow be listening to it out of his own conviction, out of that same ideology that makes him not want to listen to it. So what would that be? Okay, he'd be monitoring. He'd be, maybe listening in on someone who was listening to it. But of course, that'd have to be someone who has a different conviction to his. And suddenly, then I had this image that really popped into my head of a person listening, expecting to listen to the words of his enemy, and actually listening to the most beautiful music, which he would have to shut out of his soul to be able to persecute this enemy in the way that he wants to. And that suddenly, I'm sure you've all experienced this, when you suddenly have just the flow, that beautiful rush of an idea. It's
Right.
really like some marvelous drug is poured straight into your bloodstream, and really within I'm sure it was less than a minute or something, the whole story for The Lives of Others completely formed in my head.
While you were 24 lying on the floor?
Yeah, lying on the
Wow.
floor. It just all came to me completely. I got up, went to my computer, and spent an hour, writing those 2 pages. And I, when I moved here to Los Angeles, I found that box again and looked at that, and it's, I don't know, it's 80% of the, that 80% of the film is there. It's maybe more. It's so the main points are really completely in that story, and it's really just it's just in the little things that things changed.
Was the Stasi part of the story at that point?
It was just because it was without me knowing anything other than that they had listened into other people, and it was easier for me to write it with something that pertained to Germany in some way. But I did seriously thought about where do I locate it? What should it be maybe Poland in Solidarność? Should it be some kind of Russian story? Should it be a South American military dictatorship and so on? But then I looked at those carefully, but then thought, the interesting thing about the Stasi was, unlike those other dictatorships, they didn't really kill people. That's not. They did a few, but every government unfortunately does. But
People killed themselves, apparently.
Yes, but no. But what I mean is they drove people in a way to suicide because their methods were completely psychological. They had the largest secret service proportionally to the population in the history of mankind, and they used it to truly make people think differently. They wanted to know what people thought, and if I'd done this in Russia, where the KGB just killed so many people and was so physically violent and tortured and all these things, it would have seemed. I don't know. I think the story would not have been as relevant, I think, to our times, where psychological methods are used so often, and so I I just researched more about them and decided to look at them.
Well, there's that moment in the movie where they're talking about really how to get a writer to never write again. Because if they have that social aspect and you don't torture them, you treat them well, but you lock them up for, 10 months, 8 months, or 10 months, and put them in solitary, and then they get out and they're so broken that they never write again.
Yeah.
And it's so much more interesting in a lot of ways, the psychological torture. But it also seems so interesting because you're German that you'd sort of go to all that other exploration.
I think that speaks so much about you as a writer and as an artist, that you wanted to make sure you had the right setting. You didn't want to take it for granted.
Yeah.
Like, oh, of course it'll be Germany because I'm German. You looked around. I mean, that to me is very inspirational. That you wanted to make sure. I call that like kicking the tires, even though I know nothing about cars. But just this feeling of like, is this really where I want to be? Like for my story, is this the best my story can have?
It's the whole thing. What rings true. I mean, I always think that when you get an idea for a story, and that idea can be something, as fully fledged as I received, the lives of others, or it can be sometimes just a thought or an image or one scene or something. But I think what you have then and what you get something, you get like a pitchfork. You get you know what the story is supposed to sound like. And then you listen into lots of other things. And you try and see, do they sound like this story? And you have to go back to that pitchfork, and only you can really decide if it fits with it. And I just wanted to be sure. It takes a while to really learn to listen in to these things properly, and that's also why it's so. I don't know. I'm so going back, for our evening tonight through all the materials. And seeing, all the comments that I was barraged with from all sides about the script and so on, I'm always baffled by the arrogance of executives that they think, they have a better pitchfork, or is that the word?
I think you mean tuning fork.
Tuning fork, but we all knew what he meant, right?
Yeah. Well,
what kind of friends are you guys?
But you know why? But you know why?
We knew what you meant.
No, we
Foreign
knew what you
language
meant.
for me.
But I thought, honestly, personally, I actually think pitchfork may even be a better term for it, because it's to get the pitch. It makes it more of a double
In our
entendre.
world, we also have another kind of pitchfork. It's like this thing that you
the
do
devil
with hay.
uses, right?
Yeah.
The devil and farmers and executives.
But go back to what.
Exactly. We have a tuning fork. They have a pitchfork. No, it's just it is to me such a tremendous display of arrogance. And
this was in Germany with all the German executives, or
I tell you, it's not different here. It is something that I do find that the process and way of developing a screenplay, it's humbling to everyone, most of all to the writer, because you realize what a hard and strenuous process. No one just goes there and says, I wrote this screenplay, I just dashed it out and it's fantastic. That's not how it works. It's something you really, you question yourself at every kind of twist and turn. You have, in a way, the writer by nature is someone very critical of their own writing, and then to, for people to come along without any humility, I find it's a terrible thing. And I sometimes, I have to, in a way, it was good for me to read through these material again and see, a film that is now so accepted as The Lives of Others, to read, all the letters of people rejecting it, and with quite spitefully rejecting it, and no, it's not. I mean, I can
just share some of
share
some of the material that you went through.
One of the last materials I went through was really when I'd gotten it to, and I don't improvise kind of on the set when I have the screenplay right. I mean, sometimes if you're in a desperate situation on a film and it's just you're writing it as you're shooting, then you have to improvise. But the ideal situation is that you really get the script exactly where you want it, and then you stick to it. And we also didn't have time to try out anything. We had 30 7 shooting days, and that's then you really have to just very often the actors would have some ideas and say, look, I have an idea, we could try this or that, saying that sounds great, that idea, but we don't have the time, so let's just check.
Please don't have any more ideas.
No, it was very unfortunate in a way. Of course you did, but it was so the script really was exactly what you see on the screen, and even there, actually the main producer that I developed it with, so to speak, I seeing him as my ideal reader. I think it's Stephen King who had this beautiful idea of always, for everything you write, picking an ideal reader, one person that you really want to please with this screenplay that's not yourself. And I really said, I think ideally that should be your producer. And I said to this producer, I want you to be my ideal reader. And we really worked together, and I think he really helped me. And when then, however, everybody passed on the film. And
why? What was the reason?
Some of
Because
their
it was
thoughts?
like too political, or
the character's not real. The too much
character
exposition.
Whistler?
All the characters, not kind of not three-dimensional. The not enough. Too long of a development until something happens. And I remember that then. So this producer then, after everybody'd passed, he dropped out. And that was really one of the low points in my life, of course, where I'd worked on the screenplay for so long, and now was without a producer. And then, however, I remember these 2 guys who'd been at film school a few years and a few years behind me. They were actually still at film school at that point. They'd never produced a feature film either, but I know they had a production company registered in Munich, and that kind of helped with the funding you could get through Bavaria. And so they then sent the screenplay to one of those great expert organizations that just analyze your screenplay for you,
Really?
And those people, well, you know those kind of firms that they've analyzed millions of scripts, and they know how it goes, and what makes a good script good, and they can just it's science. And they
There's going to be an app for that soon, right?
And so they said, there are some good elements in this script. We can start developing this. Start developing this after I'd spent, and I just
How long had you spent on it by then?
I mean, we can go into kind of that whole time. I'd spent, certainly work, close to 2 years, of really working intensely on the actual script. The idea had been gestating in my head since. So this was in 2000, the beginning of 2004, and that night of lying on my aunt's carpet was in '97. So it had been with me for a while, this whole idea. But and then there was a long report, on just taking it apart and saying, this is quite obviously a beginner's screenplay. They knew that, of course, and just completely picking it apart. And I said, okay, look, either I now take this in and completely, in a way, give up, or I just ignore it entirely and just shoot it as is, And I really think very often the second option is the best. And I really think, it's that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, I find, as writers. It's not letting too many people into the process, and knowing whom to let into the process, And it's really, this is something, it's a big thing, who you choose. And very often, let's say, an aspiring or a young writer's instinct is just to go to some famous writer and say, here, look, I have this script. I get sent many scripts that's way. That's not the right way to do it. Not just because mostly those people just don't have time. That's not what it is. It's because you don't know if they're really right for it. Even if they've written something that you like, you have people in your direct entourage who are just right. They're not famous. They maybe haven't done it yet, but they're right. And if your writer's instincts are as good as they have to be for you to want to be a writer, as good as they should be, you will also have the right instincts about who to go to, who to show the things to, who will treat it gently and right. And these people will be better for you, and they'll be able to dedicate more time and life and energy into it than the three of us would. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting to me, though, listening to you talk, is there was something in you that knew what this was, that got you through everything.
Yeah.
Your depression, that it allowed you to get through these moments, no?
It was, I don't know, it wasn't as if I said, I knew it all along.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, but there was something really stubborn,
yes.
And I'm talking about that.
Stubborn, yes. Stubborn, I'll give you. That's, but not all that
certain.
Completely visionary certain.
Yeah,
yes.
not certain, but that's a different thing.
Yeah, but there's a certain thing, it's like that with probably everything. I mean, you'll grow tired of every script that you write. That point will come. And then you just have to say, I will stick with this. I will see this through the end. And then, especially I find on your first film, it's so important. It was really, really important to get this one done my way, and that was not so much simply because I'm always a kind of my way or the highway kind of person. That's not really. It was because I wanted to know, if I was delusional or not. And the only way to test that, if you have, I know so many first-time filmmakers who, I don't know, let's say, give me their films and say, here's my first feature, for instance, and I say, what do you think of it? And they say, well, I don't know, it's a first-time effort, and it's, there are problems with it, and then they start going into the circumstances of what made it problematic. So they don't really know if they have it or not, and that's kind of a thing you want to find out before you spend an entire life on something, And so I just wanted to see, I really had that very consciously on my mind. I said, I want this film to be exactly what I want it to be, because otherwise, I'll go and, try to find a way into medical school and, try and become a psychiatrist. That was a serious option for me, that was, that
would have been the fallback?
Yes. Well, yeah, it's still the fallback. But it's,
But don't you think in a way that as writers, not to be too reductive, but isn't that really what we're doing to some extent?
Well, I mean,
we're constantly having to look about what is it to be human, what is it to be a person.
It's true. I hope though, I think the wonderful thing when you're, a healer, a doctor, is that you know when you've helped people, you know, and in our field, it still always remains a hope and not a certainty. If I look back to, I remember once I was in Spain at a screening of The Lives of Others, and and there was a little girl who, and her parents, I could see that their parents talking to her, like saying, tell him, or something. And so then this shy little girl came over. She was maybe 12 or so, and she said, it's the best film that I've ever seen in my life. And I was just, I was so touched. And I really think, if I look back at all the troubles or so, I felt in a certain way that I touched this little girl, because you could see she had no reason, in a way for saying that. She
was your ideal audience.
She kind of,
she was telling the
that
truth.
I'd reached her. I know I'd really reached her, and you could tell from the way, or once I remember it was in France that I did it. I always try to do this in it's a wonderful thing if you can get your distributors to do that, is to do a little bit of a tour, so you're not only in the big cities presenting your films. I always find it's a wonderful thing if you can go to the smaller ones. In the French, so I asked the French distributor, can I go to some of the smaller cities? And we did. And I remember one of those in one of the small southern French cities. I did a screening, and there was this boy who, was maybe 18 or so, and he worked at McDonald's and actually came there in his McDonald's uniform. And afterwards, you could see he was just kind of still sitting there. He was really moved by this, and then everybody had left, and you could see he was debating with himself whether he had the courage to somehow come up and speak with us. So I just went to him, and we started speaking, and I could see that that he was someone who had dreams of being a writer, and he was really he was really moved by this by the film, and in a way it led him to some very deep philosophical questions, when we had a kind of really soul-to-soul conversation. And it's very rare that you have those moments in our profession where you really know that you've made a connection. You can hope that you have, and you can, I don't know, go on Twitter from time to time and type in the title of your film and think, but then you don't know how it's reached them. And I think the wonderful thing about being a doctor, a healer, especially a psychiatrist, is this very direct, immediate communication, and so that was a real fallback option for me. But the success of the lives of others made it move into the more distant future.
But it seems to me like that you don't. I mean, this is going to be such a weird tangent, but that you can be a psychiatrist and have no idea if you're helping people at all. Oh. And here you wrote a whole movie, and you talked about this story about this piece of music completely transforming you and having the power to, you talk in the movie a lot about it, can a man change? And you were talking about this.
Movie, The Man Can.
The Man Can. So it's almost like your whole movie wasn't about how psychiatrists heal people. It was really about how art affects people. And to me, it's why art is so important.
Well, thank you. I'll take it.
Okay. All right. But you know what I mean? I went on that weird thing because I'm sitting here going, I have a bunch of friends who are therapists, and they all have different, methodology. And they all completely disagree, and nobody knows anything about if you're helping anybody. But like I said, that's my sidebar.
Well, I don't think we ever know the effect we're having. In a way, it's not really for us to know. I mean, it's more that we are. But one of the things that I think is so powerful about your movie is that it's his job as a writer to be the conscience of the country, to speak for the people who are not writers. I mean, he's a writer, and he has a very important responsibility, and he feels he has to step up to that responsibility, and it's like, and so ultimately does the Whistler. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's about people really looking at what were they put here on earth for, and going, I just have to do this, right? And they're not doing it with the thinking of, I'm sure it'll change this one, I'm sure it'll change that one. They're doing it like, I have to do this because otherwise I'm not a writer, or otherwise I'm not a human, or it's like somehow I must, right? With no regard for a result. Mm-hmm. I mean, seriously, that's where you're at, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, because your movie is that.
No, thanks. Thank you.
I thought, it's popping in my head, it's the very end of the movie, there's I'm saying this like you don't know. Well, in your movie, there was this scene that you would love, but it's when he figures out that it had to be Whistler who protected him. Yeah. And he sees him walking down the street, and he looks at him, and he doesn't say anything to him. Mm-hmm. And then, again, it's another 2 years later, and he sees the book, and that's when he realizes, and it was so moving. And as writers, what Winnie and I talked about is there's this, a lot of times you have this obligatory scene, sometimes it's called, where if he had gotten out of the car and said something, in a way, everybody here could kind of think of a version of what that scene is. But it wouldn't be very interesting. It would just be...
Yeah, maybe if it were interesting, maybe it wouldn't be true. The thing is, it's one of those things where these people have such completely different cultural horizons, such completely different life experiences that, maybe theirs could never be a real friendship. Maybe they're people who have just met on a kind of soul level. And I'll tell you that ending is what I worked on longest, because I just, I had in my first two versions, I had an ending that I thought was worked, but it just wasn't enough, because there was it did have a meeting between the two. There was a thing that after the wall came down, the two lives of Dreimann and Wiesler took radically different turns. Dreimann being incredibly celebrated for what becomes clear what he's done to, in terms of fighting against this regime, against this dictatorship, and Wiesler actually being arrested and put to trial, and there were many more incidences of things that he did at the very beginning, where he really shattered lives, and now you have these people testifying against him, and what can he say? It's all true. He has done all these things, and you have this trial, and he's condemned, put into prison, and he has nobody. He's just there in that prison, and then you had Dreimann becoming honorary citizen of Berlin, and at this big reception where he's now the token great good-looking poet from East Germany, and people from East Germany can be successful too, kind of that kind of person, and he there at that glamorous reception meets the minister, who says, there then they have that conversation where he said,
but there's no book.
And then what happens? They have that conversation. He tells him, of course, we had you completely wired. And then he goes home, checks this, and then, although he's just, while receiving his honorary citizenship, has just given a speech about the fact that he's not going to look into those files, because he wants to look forward and not into the past. So he's not going to claim his file, which a lot of people say. I think it's an incredibly writerly position to take, to say I don't want to know about my past. It's you have a well-prepared psychoanalysis right there in writing, and you're going to forego that opportunity of getting it. One of the things, by the way, that I know that just in terms of numbers, my film really helped with was the numbers of people claiming their files when the film came out just went up drastically.
That's incredible.
And so that's really one thing where I can see a tangible effect. Although again, you don't know if it's all for the good, but if they're writers, it is. And so he then realizes, okay, he has to find out what happened here, because he was obviously wired. He reads the files, the exact same thing, and then inquires where this person is, and then he goes, then cut to the prison where someone says, Wiesler, there's a visitor for you, and he can't believe it, a visitor, and then he walks through into this visiting room, and there suddenly stands face to face with Dreimann. And he's, led there, and they both, sit down and just looking at each other. And then I had written a montage, which was very much inspired by Kieslowski's A Short Film About Love. If you haven't seen that, right after watching The Talented Mr. Ripley, watch Kieslowski's A Short Film About Love. It's a beautiful film. And I had a sequence how you see, you have a little montage of the in a way that shows a kind of togetherness that these men have had. It was more kind of written like that in these earlier versions of the scenes where, in a way, each had felt so desperately alone, but they've actually been with the other. And then just as a very last thing, just Dreimann puts his hand on Wiesler's hand, and you end the film just kind of with that gesture. It worked, but it was just a little bit off from the tuning fork, just a little bit off. And
identify what was bothering you about it?
it was a little, I think it was that the truth beyond the film was hard to see. What were these people going to do now? Were they going to, go out every Thursday and have a beer? It's just not, they have such completely different horizons. And so I thought, I have to find something else. I have to find something else. And I tried out.
Where they ended separately.
Where they ended up not seeing each other, but you still have a kind of, a real satisfying soul connection.
Right.
And then, I tried out so many different things. And finally thought, what, no, I'll just stay with it. But then I actually had this thing. I took up a hobby. I mean, I have terrible handwriting, and I always wanted, I always try and improve the things that, I have to in a way use anyway. So I'm always working on my English. I'm always working on my driving. Still not a great driver, but I kind of try and get better at those things. And so one of these things was handwriting. I hate it whenever I see a written document. I think, wow, this, am I really that bad, juvenile psychopath? So I actually bought several books on calligraphy, really like a 13-year-old girl was kind of just doing calligraphy and this was during the phase, and I really got into it and knowing exactly what calligraphy pens to buy and all this, and then I use this as just writing whatever word came to my mind. And I'll tell you that really worked for me. Suddenly, I saw, to HGV, just the abbreviation in gratitude, and then I kind of kept on writing, and just the whole scene just flowed out of my calligraphy pen. And I suddenly had it. I even had the price that the book was going to cost. It was all there, and it really reconciled me, because this was just after Elia Kazan had died, and I was incredibly depressed when I heard that Elia Kazan had died, because to me he's just one of those great figures, and someone his autobiography, A Life, has really helped me through many difficult times in filmmaking and on this, on the journey towards becoming a filmmaker. And I'd always had this dream that, at some point, I'd create something that would make me worthy to, approach him and speak with him. And I was always debating, well, maybe he'll almost rather meet me if I haven't yet achieved anything, and I'll just come and speak with him and just tell him how much I understand him, in every way. And then he died. And I thought, oh my God, I am just such an idiot. I'm spending, months here working on my calligraphy skills where I should have been, writing Elia Kazan a letter, and I was, really even more depressed. And then, however, the calligraphy did bring me, this fruit. And I actually, to remind me of the fact that sometimes a breakthrough feels so simple, because I knew it was a real breakthrough. I knew I really had it. And from that actually sprang many other things that just became a lot better about the script. And I really think that the third version, which I then wrote pretty quickly after having this insight, was, already had pretty much everything in it. And I actually framed for myself that page of, pretty mediocre calligraphy, but that had the right lines on it. Actually, I've brought it. So, Christiane, willst du mal rumreichen? Yeah, you can just hand it around.
That's why it's Christiane.
Yeah. While people are looking at that, I was wondering, because we do like to preserve stuff in the library, if you could maybe get us a copy of those 2 pages you wrote when you were 24, because I would love to see that and maybe make that available in the library. And we also are going to get an English translation of the script that will be available in the library. So,
also, I want to say, Robin and I have studied with an incredible woman who's a great cartoonist, writer, playwright, incredible woman named Linda Barry, and she teaches writing. And when I say she teaches writing, she really teaches a class that's about accessing your creative self, your deepest self, and your most creative childlike self. And she will have you draw in a sort of hypnotic-y way,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in a
Talks a lot about
dreamy-
also, like, even if you're not an artist, to paint. You know, there's a book that she wrote called What It Is. If you don't know it, it's like an amazing book. But in a way, it's almost like I don't really know what it is, but I mean, partly my theory is it's a distraction for your brain so that you're not trying so hard to think of something, like you're doing something else, which allows it to.
It's a way of relaxing in a deep way so that your subconscious can come out to play, kind of. But it just fascinated me that you said that you had your breakthrough. Both of the breakthroughs that you're describing are, you know, you're sort of in a surrendered state, and you're having an experience that's kind of involving on a deeper level, so that your subconscious again is free to kind of ruminate and come up with something. And it obviously works beautifully for you.
You know, and I must say that I have those experiences, you know, a few times a year, I'd say, you know, where really something comes to me in that kind of full power. And almost always, when it happens, I'm not equipped with a pen or a computer or something like that, and I actually forget it completely, because there's no way that if you do not write these kind of things, at least for me, that if you do not write these kind of things down immediately, you can remember them. You know, I actually remember once it was in a store, and I suddenly had an idea that just felt so much greater than anything I've ever had, you know, and I thought, and it just came completely fully formed, you know, like The Lives of Others, even more detail. I could see the whole thing. And I just ran out of the store and really started running back home. And I was just so thrilled, and I was just jumping and skipping, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm really gonna make a mark in history. And by the time I arrived home, I'd completely forgotten what it was, you know. And there's no way you can get those things back.
It's like a dream.
Know?
It sounds
Yeah.
like you're trying to hold on to a dream.
Yeah, exactly. It's much harder than holding on to a dream. It's one of those things. That's why, you know, I really think, you know, as writers, we should always, carry a pen and paper, and it's not enough to, you may have forgotten by the time you type in your security code for your iPhone, So no, it's really true. You should. It's because what is truly new, what is kind of in some way by whatever your intuition or some spiritual force or whatever, what is given to you, does not fit into your normal way of remembering and thinking. If it did, you could just create it at will, but it doesn't. So you have no way of remembering it. The spider net of your memories cannot catch that fly, and so you have to try and I'm sure you've had those experiences, and it's pretty. It's pretty terrible.
I used to have them a lot when I used to get high.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was like, if only I could finish this tonight before I went to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've also had the fear. I mean, when I'm getting sort of flooded with an idea, I have it's a very kind of frightening feeling at the same time that I'm not going to be able to capture it. And I mean, that is.
Well, you won't be able to capture it.
Exactly.
You just have to capture the tiniest little shred of it.
Exactly.
That's what it is, because that's all you need. You'll only be able to capture a small part of it anyway. But you need a little sample of that fabric, and then you can weave the whole tapestry, and it'll take you years to weave it anyway. But you need that little piece. Otherwise, you have nothing. And you can't reconstruct it.
So you've had other scripts that you've had this same kind of intense.
Yes.
Relationship too that you had with The Lives of Others, because that's always the fear too. It's like you fall madly in love with something, even though you're working hard, and there are times when you're depressed and all of that, but you've had this experience again.
Oh yes, absolutely. It's and I think with those things, it's so actually after I had after I had that idea for The Lives of Others, I always thought that's a good idea, but I can do that at some point, and I actually had another idea that I thought was even better and more fun, and I worked on that for a long time, and then made the mistake, and I kind of can now see why I actually of giving it to the wrong person for feedback, and the feedback was, I don't know, someone trying to present himself in that feedback rather than really trying to feel what you were doing, and it was therefore quite critical because he wanted to seem really smart, and it was, but it was so hurtful to me at that time, that feedback, that I actually completely forgot about the idea. It was really gone, and then. And I completely dropped that thing. Although there's so much, I put so much time and effort into that, into developing that. It was like a 50-page treatment or something. And and so this was in, this has been 2000, maybe 2000 or 2001. And only now did I, by chance, actually, when speaking with a friend, I suddenly remembered this thing, and it was, and I thought, wow, wait, did I dream this, or did I really kind of write this? Do I have a fully fledged, fully developed thing there that really thrills me that much? And I actually went. I had. I remember that for some other reason I still had the hard drive of the computer that I had at that time, an old IBM Aptiva. They don't even exist anymore. And I had the hard drive, and then I got a computer expert, and he tried to find his way into that, and then it was written in Lotus Pro or some kind of old software program that doesn't even exist anymore. But he found a way to revive it, and I read this, and I thought, wow, it's really just the wrong word from the wrong person can really be so damaging to a writer. Now I can revive that project, but that was it almost didn't happen. So no, I mean I have that sometimes, and I think it's a wonderful thing, but you really have to try and really enjoy the joy of that idea coming to you, because for a very long time you will not have any joy afterwards.
That's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
Well, it's also, I mean, talk about a tuning fork. As writers, we're like human tuning forks, because you see how much it affected you. Like, but, it's not like, we haven't heard you talk about, winning the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. It's like what really got you were that 12-year-old girl and the guy that you had that soul connection with, and you had this amazing connection, and then this guy can say one word, and it completely changes your life, and that's partly, it's like we're a raw nerve walking around.
No, it really is, and I mean it's I think one of the main skills as a writer that you learn over a lifetime, and I'm certainly not there yet, but is somehow learning how to protect yourself, emotionally, and I think of really getting to know yourself, and be it only to protect yourself and to protect your work and your ideas. It's that I'm sure is a lifelong journey, but I do think there are people who have truly figured it out, and I'm getting closer.
What kind of things do you do, to that end? What kind of?
Well, I mean. No, just be conscious of what hurts you and what gives you joy, and really try and not try and think, what should give me joy and what should, maybe not hurt me, because things that hurt you do. But,
I think that's really true. Sometimes it's, I always think of it like part of the job is. I have to know. I mean, it's interesting. You talked about being a psychiatrist. I have to know a lot about how my own mind works and how my emotions get triggered. I just have to, because I'm sort of the one. I mean, I'm my own instrument. Not to sound too highfalutin, but I'm my instrument, and my whole everything is wrapped up in my psyche.
Yeah.
So I do think it behooves me to. It's my job. It's not other people who encounter me job. It's my job to know what I'm.
Yes, and I mean, I think at the same time you have to somehow, of course, be tough with yourself. I mean, I found one thing that I'd really forgotten that I'd actually done is I got so many notes from all sides, because in a way, to put this film together, we had to have so many different, producing parties and lots of little companies. I mean, whenever I see a film, and it's mostly the, kind of medium-sized to small films, and you have 10 logos at the beginning of the film, I always think, oh my God, that poor director, because it's just I know, and writer, of course, I know what they went through, and what I actually did, and I'd forgotten that, is that I used to write myself pages and pages, a little booklet, as I took it together, of notes that I wrote myself, as if I were, in a way, the studio head, speaking directly and frankly, to me, the writer. And that's actually, I looking through it, I realized that, I really talked sense into myself, because
for some of the notes you would write.
I mean, they were things that, I think I put them all into, I think they should all be visible in the screenplay. How to form a character, how to make a scene more interesting, how to maybe make a certain scene that already works longer, or for example, one of the things that I remember specifically kind of saying is how if a scene works, it's normally the whole scene that works. It's normally not just a little element, and then you can do two things. You can expand that scene, because normally if you've written that scene well and you feel so good about it, you can put a little more in there and it'll also really work. And the other thing is, put the things that work under a kind of, nature protection program, like make it a protected area, nothing should change, and there were things like that. Or, I don't know, there were also notes of saying, I had some things in the interrogation scene, for instance, where I felt that he was doing a different thing. He was telling the prisoner, he was telling his students how he had always wanted a certain piece of information from this prisoner. The prisoner was in contact with people who were smuggling people out through to the west. This was a big thing in East Germany, and this person was not willing to talk and wouldn't talk. And then he kind of has the students analyze this person's case, and he sees, okay, do you see anything unusual about this couple? And they analyze the whole, the family background. They say, well, they've been together for so many years and they don't have any children. He says, yes, that should be an indication of something that's just different, about these people. So he gets their family doctor as an informant, which was a common practice in East Germany, and waits for the point when the family doctor announces to the Stasi and to the couple also, of course, that they're pregnant, that the woman's pregnant, and that is when he decides to arrest them, because he knows they're particularly vulnerable. And it was kind of cutting back and forth, and it was kind of interesting. But then I found this note to myself where I said, what, you're just writing that because we just had a kid, and it's it's also, I don't know, it feels a little too close for comfort. Come up with something else. So I mean, in a way, it was and then then I went back to the library and found this book on the Un-American detectives. It's interesting if you go into Interrogation, and even a large library like the Berlin Library, there's not too many books on it, and most of them American. And
surprising to me.
Yeah. But so it was it was a lot of notes on how to make someone more three-dimensional, and it was just the kind of notes that normally you really resent getting from the studio. You'll resent them less getting them from yourself.
It's a great attitude.
Sometimes I'm super harsh with myself, though. Like I'll write a lot on the nose, or like I'll cross stuff out. Lame.
Yeah, but
harsh.
But if you can say it, and only feel, well, it's a little untrue, but it's also a little fair, then you're right. If you then you're right, and that it should go. In a way, the only thing that should stay is something that it just feels so wrong to criticize it. That's when you should leave something. And it'll, I mean, that'll happen.
You know what, guys? Let's take a short break, and by short, I call it a hard 7, which means really 7 minutes. There's like a little food out there. And then we'll come back, and if you guys have questions for Florian, we'll open it up. And Winnie and I still have more questions. So we do a little break here.
Okay. Yeah.
You're just great. Would you like anything? Would you like me to bring you
Actually,
something?
maybe one more wine. I'd like.
Yeah, I'll bring you
What? Oh, yeah, I understand. Where's the, oh, Winnie's getting you one?
Yeah. It's great.
Sure. There's what? Okay, I'll be right there. Yeah, right. There's certain things like the foundation you can attend anything, but the guild you can't. You have to be a member. Just the way it goes. Sorry. Yeah, I know. It's, yeah.
We're gonna maybe just sit at the end. I also don't. Yeah, I'd like to tell them that was great. I do too. Yeah.
Let's say, unless you want to, unless you want to do that, then of course, that's it. Then you do experience the way, but you also want to experience the writer's process. You will only experience the various drafts that they go through, and you'll give them notes or something like that. But it's that's a good question, because and actually, that's something I think that why don't you ask it, because because I think that's something. Will you really go into it? I really go into it because I can anything that I don't answer, then I'll gladly tell you afterwards. So tell me how to articulate it, so that I get it concise. But I think it's good if you say say or you have a career and background in the different fields. You, however, have always felt attracted to writing, and but you've never really approached it in a structured way, right? What advice do you have for someone who's professional writer? Yeah. But how do they get started? What's the first step? Yeah. That's really that at the end of the day is the question. I think that's a very valid question. And also, like, how do you further ideas? Like, do you like, because I have so many different ideas that I sort of jot down in a little book. Oh yes. And then it's like, but then I how, do you? I feel like the lack of commitment to what, like, do you pick one and do you work on each of them, or how's that process? Yeah. No, I mean that's that I'd say that's a separate question. I think what it's really good to always let those suggestions, no matter what